make a small confession to the group here. I've been involved in one way or another with this subject for over 30 years. But about 6 months ago, maybe 8 months ago, I was about ready to pack it all in, walk away from the subject, just say to hell with it and not ever get involved with it again. And the reason for that was that having been involved with a number of different organizations over the years and done a lot of research both in the military and outside of the military, I had reached a point where I was just up to here with all of the fighting, the rock throwing, the name calling, the brickbats, the mudslinging that goes on in UFO research. And many of you who have been involved in that know exactly what I'm talking about. We apparently have been our own worst enemies over the years. Not only do we have to deal with all of the lies and the cheating from our government, but we haven't made it easier for ourselves with all this name calling going on for a long time. And I got so fed up with it. Excuse me. I also got a little fed up with the fact that all of the years that I had been trying to discuss this subject seriously with a lot of people, I was not enthused, I was not impressed at all with the response from the American public. And I got a little bitter about it, and I got a little cynical about it, and I got to the point thinking to myself, damn it, if they don't really care, if they're not really interested, why the hell should I worry about it so much? Why should I work so hard and strive so desperately to bring some of this information out? Well, fortunately, my attitude changed, partly because I was successful in a lawsuit that I was involved with. For those of you who may not know anything about me, I retired from the military in '76. I immediately began to work for Tucson and Pima County as an emergency services plans and operations officer, and for the last 8 years worked for the Pima County Sheriff's Department in that same capacity. And in 1990, my boss retired from his job. I and 70 other applicants applied for the position. We went through the entire hiring process according to all of the statutes, all of the rules, and I ended up number 2 on the list, and a good friend of mine came out number 1. Well, Karen, number 1, turned the job down, and they should have offered the job to me. Fully qualified, fully trained, all of the certification necessary. Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA certification, graduation of all kinds of schools and courses, and they didn't let me have the job. Didn't offer me the job. Never gave me any excuse and reasons as to why. It came to be that we found out when I brought about legal action against the sheriff that his main issue with me, his main reason for denying me the position of emergency services manager, was that I was interested and involved with UFO research. And the state investigators, the city investigators, the county investigators, civil rights people, all of them looked at that and said, what the hell does that have to do with this? Here's probably one of the most qualified people we've got. You're denying him the position because he's been involved and interested in UFO research. Well, it all came, push come to shove. I ended up filing a grievance, and I filed a charge. And then I finally got myself an attorney, and we went to court. And it took 2 long years. And I've equated it with the Korean War and the Vietnamese War, because the toll upon me and Cecilia was very much like a war. We had to take out a second mortgage on our house. We had to borrow money to hire a good attorney to sue the Pima County Sheriff, who was the chief law enforcement officer in Tucson and Pima County, for violating the law. Well, just to summarize quickly, I don't want to go into that. It's all over with now. It took 2 years. It took over $31,000 of our money to bring this guy under the legal system in Tucson and Pima County to the courts. 1 week before a jury trial, the sheriff decided to settle out of court. After 2 full years of pure hell, we won the case. We got the job, we got the back pay, we got the retirement, and we also got a relatively comfortable amount of money. Well, we got $100,000, which was tort damage money, which I must tell you is tax-free. So the 2 years of pure hell we went through, and having mortgaged our house, we did come out of it all right. We survived it. And the fact that I became somewhat of a celebrity here in this issue, because I think I'm the only one that I know of who has successfully sued anybody on the issue of UFOs. And a number of people all over the country, in MUFON, CUFOS, and friends of mine all over the United States, were following this whole thing very closely. And the fact that we did get a couple of articles in several of the tabloids, we had a little 12-minute stint on hard copy. The interest of the case was pretty interesting all over the country. There are a lot of people following this. But I must tell you, and I'm pleased to share with you, that we did win the thing. We did prevail. We made an issue of it, and I'm delighted that we made some progress here, because hopefully in the few years ahead there will be some hesitancy on the part of certain other bureaucratic people to let an issue like this come as far as it did with me, that they denied me. Well, thank you. It was just a matter, it was a moral issue after it was all over with, the fact that they would dare do that. I had to sue the chief law enforcement officer of Pima County for violating the law. And then I had to stand back and watch him for 2 years use the county attorney to defend him for violating the law. And then they did that with taxpayers' money. And that really frosted me. Being an old infantryman, that really brought me to the bar. And I'm delighted to tell you that we did win, and I want to share that with you and then go on. Anyhow, about 6-8 months ago, I was ready to walk away from this thing because of that issue and a number of other ones. But I had just completed a 6-week tour in Europe. And I was a speaker at 3 major international conferences. And I met literally hundreds and hundreds of people, researchers, bona fide, reliable, intelligent, serious UFO researchers. And they encouraged me. And just having been with them and met with them, I found strength and encouragement. And that, coupled with the fact that I'd done a little more research in my own personal investigations and found out how much our own government is involved with what is known as psychotronic research. I got so damn mad that, being angry about the fact that they've been lying to us for over 40 years about the UFOs, having found out what some of the things are going on in psychotronic research, I got so angry I said, to hell with it, I'm going to come back and fight this all the way through. I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to open my mouth. I'm going to blab and bring as much attention to this issue as I possibly can. So, thank you. So with the help from Cecilia and a lot of good friends like Wendell Stevens, I'm going to be busy as hell for the next 2 years. Now, a little bit of background on how I came into this area. Most of my adult life, I was a professional soldier. Almost all of those years were in the infantry. I was in special operations. I worked with the special forces guys. I worked with the intelligence agencies, the CIA, the ASA. I spent a lot of time in places I should never have been, places that our government said we had nobody over there. Now, as you all remember, some of the reading you may have done about Laos and Cambodia and North Vietnam. But I always thought of myself as a rather hard-nosed professional soldier. No nonsense. I was very curious about the issue in the early years, but I was a skeptic. I thought, well, I have to learn a little more about it before I become what you might call a believer. In 1963, I was fortunate enough to be assigned to a place called Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, at that time located in Paris, France, an acronym of SHAPE. When I went to SHAPE in 63, I went with a cosmic top secret clearance. Cosmic top secret at the time was the highest level of clearance access in the NATO forces in SHAPE at all. And I understand it still is. It's the highest possible in NATO. And I was assigned to SHAPE headquarters in Roquencourt, right outside of Paris. When my first assignment was in Operations Division, a place we called SHOC, Supreme Headquarters Operations Center. And I became aware in 1963 of a study that had been initiated in 1961, a NATO SHAPE military study that Air Marshal Sir Thomas Pike, who was the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe under my boss, General Lyman Lemnitzer, had initiated a study in 1961 to determine just what in the hell was going on with the UFO matter. In the 50s and the early 60s, case after case after case involving large circular metallic objects flying in formations, obviously under intelligent control, flying over Central Europe, coming out of the Soviet zone, over the Warsaw Pact, coming over Germany, over France, turning north over the Channel, disappearing off of our radar over the Norwegian Sea. And in a number of cases, at least 3 cases that I know of personally, we and the Soviets almost went to war with each other over these objects. As many of the speakers have said here earlier about other comments, the Soviets thought they belonged to us. and we thought they belonged to the Soviets. And in one case in particular, in February of 1961, we literally damn almost started shooting at each other. Well, Air Marshal Pike was so frustrated about the fact that he was unable to get any information about these objects from either London or Washington at that time, because everything that London and Washington would send to SHAPE headquarters went directly to the KGB in Moscow. We found out about this because there was an enormous French spy ring existing in Paris at that time. And if any of you have ever read Leon Uris's excellent book called Topaz, or maybe you have seen the movie called Topaz, it was about that series of events that were taking place. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the tension that was developing with the Cubans and the Russians over that time, the fact that there was this enormous French spy ring involving several of their top ministers and many of their top generals. And everything that Washington or London would give us went directly to KGB, and in many cases they got it before we did. So that's why Pike was unable to get any information at all from either major headquarters or capital on the UFO matter. The UFOs were all over Europe at that time. Well, they were before, and they still are even today. This is a worldwide phenomenon, and it's going on continually. But the military were becoming quite interested and concerned in the 60s about this, particularly when we and the Soviets almost started fighting over it. So the Air Marshal established a study in '61 that lasted for 3 years. I learned about it when I was assigned there, and I saw it when it was published in 1964. It was a military study called an assessment. It has since been called the assessment, and its subtitle was an evaluation of a possible military threat to Allied forces in Europe. This was probably the most in-depth study, the most complete study that I have ever seen. Some of the top minds in Europe at some of the top universities, and some of the top military people all over the Western Alliance worked on this study to try to determine what the UFO issue was all about. Is there a threat involved? If there is, what are we going to do about it? What possibly could we do about it? And once this thing was published, and it was published only in 15 copies, cosmic top secret, and because I was working in the shock, I had a chance to read it. I must be frank with you and tell you that having seen this thing and studied it, it literally has changed my life. The curious skeptic stopped being skeptical because it dawned on me for the first time in my life that this was serious business and this was real, and it literally turned my life around. So I will share with you a few things that I learned while I was involved with this. And I must tell you something else. I have to confess this. I do it every time. By sharing some of this information with you, I am in the process of violating my national security oath. Now, I want you to know, particularly those of you who may be retired military in the room here, and I think there's several, I was a loyal Cold Warrior for almost all of my years in the military. I believe in my country. I believe in my Constitution. I was willing to die for it. I still feel that way. I did not lightly decide to violate my national security oath after a great deal of thought and a great deal of consideration and evaluation. I have been violating my national security oath on this issue, the issue of UFOs, the issue of this assessment with people, because I consider this to be, beyond any doubt, the major issue of our time. And when I've concluded my presentation today, I hope you will understand, and hopefully you will agree with me, that what we are addressing here and dealing with is indeed the major issue of our time. It goes beyond the Soviet dissolution of the Soviet Union. It goes beyond the Cold War. It goes beyond politics, the recent election. It goes beyond the famines, the revolutions, the terror in Yugoslavia. It goes beyond any major human problem that we are currently dealing with on this planet, because this problem has been with us for thousands of years and is indeed the major issue of our time. And I hope you will agree with me when I'm finished as to why. The assessment was about 1.5 inches, maybe 1.75 inches thick. The study itself, in its conclusions. It was supported by approximately 8 inches of annexes, supporting documents, supporting studies, supporting research. There were annexes on radar and electromagnetic effects. There was an annex on optical and light analysis, a beautiful annex on photographic and holographic analysis. There was historical research and evidence. They went to some of the top people in England at Oxford and Cambridge on the historical evidence. There was metallurgical and technical analysis. There were atmospheric physics studies, biological analysis, and autopsies. The three issues that I thought of at the time of being the most important were the psychological studies and the impact upon the human race, sociological effects and implications, and probably what I have considered to be the most important annex and study of all in terms of its effect upon the world population is the theological implications and impact. As I told you, when I got a chance to see this thing, it's a wonder that I didn't get arrested, and it's a wonder they didn't pull my clearance, because every time I was in duty in shock, I'd pull it out of the vault and read it. Now, if any of you have been involved in military assignments and research, you know that we have created for ourselves over the years a literal nightmare of security, security operations, classifications, cover-up, secrets. We've made an absolute jungle out of it. The Cold War was the original reason we did this, and we established procedures that the American people today, if they knew the whole story of what the security apparatus in the United States military and in the United States government were doing to them and to their so-called constitutional guarantees, they'd be rioting in the streets. The Defense Intelligence Agency and every one of the, I think maybe at least 24 major security organizations in our government concluded that beyond the shadow of a doubt, this secret must be kept not only from the American people, but from the world population at large. And as a result of that decision, they have created a worldwide conspiracy among governments to keep the lid on this secret. Now, let me share with you what some of the 4 major conclusions of the assessment were in 1964, and consider those bits of information with what you've already learned in your own research and studies, and what's been brought out in films and UFO conferences over the last 10-15 years. In 1964, they had determined, at least this is in the NATO study, and I know for a fact that this is the conclusions that had been reached by our own military as early as 1949. Number 1, the planet Earth is and has been the subject of an extensive, massive, a very thorough and detailed study by several extraterrestrial civilizations. Now that's an attention getter in itself. Number 2, these civilizations have demonstrated an extremely advanced technology, possibly hundreds or even thousands of years beyond our own. It gets better. There seems to be a process or a plan of some kind unfolding. The studies indicated and demonstrated that a development of some kind of program was underway. Evidence collected indicated that the program has been going on for a very long time, possibly hundreds or even thousands of years, and some of my associates, research fellows, and I have concluded it's probably been going on longer than that. The study concluded that there did not appear to be a major military threat involved in 1964. That if they, whoever they are, were malevolent or hostile, there was absolutely nothing we could do, because the level of technology that had been demonstrated was so far beyond anything we had in 1964 that we felt that if they were hostile or malevolent, the game was up. It was all over with. Now, I think you can understand what kind of an impact this kind of information had on me as a young professional career soldier. It did indeed change my life. It changed my life so much that from that point on, I became an avid UFO researcher. I read everything I could get. I stuck my nose into every classified document I could find, and having had cosmic top secret clearance, which in the military is no small thing, I point to that with pride. You have to walk the thin line to get a cosmic top secret clearance. But I stuck my nose into everything I could find for the next 30 years. And I retired in the military in 1976. And as you probably well know, at that point I lost many of my access. I lost my clearance, I lost my connections, I lost access to a lot of my friends, but I have established over the years, like many professionals, what we call the old boy network. I still have a lot of old cronies and friends who still serve in positions of importance and sensitivity in the government. I have friends that are working at Langley. I have friends that are lurking. That's a good slip there, yeah. They are lurking and working at Fort Meade, where the super secret ASA, National Security Agency, as we say jokingly, no such agency, that's what the NSA stands for. And I still keep in touch with many of these people, and I still learn information from time to time. And this last year, Cecilia and I went to visit Michael in Dusseldorf, Michael Hesseman, and we took a few days off and drove over to Belgium, and then we went down to SHAPE headquarters, to the new SHAPE headquarters, which I helped establish in 1967. So I keep my fingers in, I try to keep my connections open, and I try to keep learning. But I've devoted 30 years of my life to putting together what I call a synthesis. This synthesis is the major piece of the book that I am in the process of writing, which I've been writing for 10 years now. I've been telling myself I either have to put up or shut up. It's time to write it, publish it, or stop talking about it. I have made a synthesis over the years, and you all know, I'm sure, what that word means. It means bringing together an extreme variety of assorted pieces and bits of information from all kinds of sources. And it was what I was trained to do in the military, to sift, to evaluate, to consider, to review, and try to come up with a conclusion of what's going on. My 30-year synthesis, which I hope to publish later this summer, this coming year, I have reached conclusions that many of my friends consider earth-shaking. Many of my deeply religious fundamentalist friends say, I am doing the work of the devil. But I want you to share with me what I have concluded, not only from the study in 1964, the assessment, but what I have learned or what I have concluded to be happening in the 30 years since. Now, I want you to bear in mind that I am not proselytizing here. I'm not on a crusade, and I'm not trying to change your lives. I'm simply trying to stimulate your curiosity and intelligence enough to do your own research. I have always considered to be curiosity as one of the primary requirements for intelligence. The higher level of intelligence, the more curious you are. It was one of the reasons why I became so depressed over the years when the average American out there didn't seem to really be interested that much in what we were talking about. And I got a little depressed about it. But I've gone beyond that now. Anyhow, I must tell you that I have reached some conclusions that I must tell you I share with people that I respect. Many of you are aware, I'm sure, of the monumental work that Zecharia Sitchin has done. The incredible books that he's written called The Earth Chronicles, The 12th Planet, The Stairway to Heaven, and 3 or 4 others. I have concluded in my 30 years of research that the human race is indeed a hybrid race. The evidence is literally overwhelming. And if you dig into it and you study it and you evaluate it seriously, you reach the same conclusions. Every major religious philosophy in our history, on every part of this planet, whether it's in Europe, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Hinduism, every major human religious endeavor has told the basic same story. The human race is a hybrid race. We have been created here. We were seeded here. And we have been genetically manipulated here from the very beginning of our recorded history. And that genetic manipulation has never ceased. It is still going on, as Cecilia likes to say, even as we speak. So, I reached that conclusion, and I will not argue with anybody about it. I simply say to you, look at the evidence. I am a student of history. I studied theology. I studied philosophy. I became interested many, many years ago when it dawned on me that much of the Bhagavad Gita was in detail specifically identical to much of the Sermon on the Mount. The teachings of the carpenter from Galilee are almost identical to the teachings of Krishna, the great Hindu leader of the Hindu faith. And I think from what they've been able to piece together, Krishna's period of time was roughly 1,000 or 2,000 years before Christ was born. The point I'm making here is that every major religious philosophy on this planet tells us identically the same story. And you have to look at the evidence to see it. I will just quickly touch upon the fact, and in chapter 6, I think, in the book of Genesis. There are people, there are entities. In the old Hebrew, they called them Elohim. It's a translation roughly meaning those who came down from above. It was mistranslated over the years as the sons of the gods. But the Elohim in the book of Genesis are saying, and this is a quote, "Let us," plural, "create man in our," plural, "image." And when I was a boy, I used to ask my preacher, I used to go to Sunday school, "My goodness, what does that mean?" And it was amazing how many times most of the preachers would say, we'll discuss that later, or they didn't have an answer for you. I always wondered about that passage in the book of Genesis. Let us create man in our image. Who are they? Who are the plurals? You know, I was told by the preacher that we were all created by God. Well, I began digging and digging and digging, and I was a very nasty little student. I never accepted a lot of their answers. And I have to share this quickly with you. My wife was also thrown out of the church a few years ago for taking on the Vatican and the Catholic hierarchy about the same kind of issues. And I'm very proud of her for that. Anyhow, where am I here? All right, the human race is a hybrid. We have been seeded here. The evidence is overwhelming, and I refer you to Sitchin's work. And in my book, which is coming out this summer, I have about a 10-page bibliography of other works that you can research and find out what I'm talking to you about. Apparently, this seems to be what has happened. Several 100,000 years ago, an intelligent race from somewhere else out there came by the planet, knew of the planet, stopped at the planet, and found a developing form of life here. Now, there are theories that the original seeding itself was done by an intelligent race from other places. But some of the theories have stated that this advanced intelligence was on an excursion, a trip, and they stopped off here and found a developing form of life and decided to manipulate that developing form of life into a higher form. And they've been involved in that off and on, but continually, for at least 100,000 years. When I studied anthropology some years ago, I always wondered why poor old Neanderthal suddenly disappeared in terms of time, a few centuries. And this new form, completely new form, which we call Cro-Magnon, appeared. What happened to poor old Neanderthal? Who is Cro-Magnon? Well, look around the room. You'll see Cro-Magnon here right today. But in terms of geology, in terms of anthropology, in terms of evolutionary theory, none of that seemed to make a lot of sense. You don't have evolution working that fast. Then there were other little curious things taking place. Why, about 5,000 BC in Sumer, did all kinds of things happen at once? A literal eruption of civilization taking place in the Euphrates and Tigris and Euphrates valleys. I mean, civilization blossomed and bloomed almost overnight. The people were taught, or they learned, agriculture, irrigation. They built cities. They knew how to plant farms. They knew how to harvest. They knew how to develop intricate governmental systems. They developed a military idea. They developed a very intricate theological and philosophical philosophy. And where did this all happen? Why did it all happen literally overnight? Well, Zecharia Sitchin, in his absolutely monumental work, clearly has the answer. In the great Sumerian tablets, in the cuneiform tablets, which preserve the complete history of the Sumerian people, the evidence is all there. Sitchin is probably one of about 10 people on the planet who can sit down and read cuneiform tablets like you and I read the morning paper. And he's a man of great respectability. He's a scholar. He's a scientist. No one wants to argue with Zecharia. They'll take von Daniken on, and they'll argue with Eric and call him names and say, look, you screwed up here, you made a mistake there. But no one that I am aware of has ever challenged Zecharia Sitchin, because he has the tablets, he has the information, and he says, look, it's all there. The Sumerians told us how it happened, how it came to be, where they got the knowledge, who taught them the knowledge. And this fits, and I tell you it does, fit perfectly with every other story, myth, legend, history of every people on this entire planet. The human race is a hybrid. We were seeded here, and we have had what I like to call an intimate interrelationship with high technology, advanced intelligence, for hundreds of thousands of years. Now, the crucial thing is that it's still going on. It hasn't stopped. They are still involved. And the big question has been, for many of us, is who the hell are they, and what are they doing with us? Which ties in perfectly with the ancient philosophical questions that each and every one of us has asked. Who are we? Who are we? How did we come to be here? What are we here for? And where are we going? And this is, if you remember from your own teachings, education, in school or church, the basic questions that human beings have been asking since the beginning of time. Who are we? Why are we here? And where are we going? And now in the last 25, maybe 50 years, enough people on this planet have seen enough evidence. They have had literally some of the facts and some of the evidence rubbed on their nose. And the world, the people of the planet, are slowly beginning to pay attention. And that to me is the part, the gratifying part, which has kept me involved in this and kept me committed in my small way to bring some of this information out. Not to preach to you, not to have a crusade of any kind, but simply to tell you that you are a special species. The carpenter from Galilee tried to explain it. Krishna tried to explain it. Mohammed tried to tell the story. Zoroaster tried to tell the same basic story. The Buddha even tried. Why is it that it's taken us so long to begin to grasp a little of the reality of who we are, why we're here, and what's going on? Well, my commitment to this thing has been growing over the years, and I will tell you that I'm involved in it, I'm committed to it, because I think that time is running out. I don't think it's going to be much longer before you see most of the answers. And the reason I share that with you is that I'm not trying to frighten you. And again, I'm not trying to preach or proselytize. I'm not trying to lead you in any direction. But I'm trying to say to you that in the next very few short years, you're going to be seeing things, and you're going to be experiencing things that are going to literally change your life in ways you have never dreamed or imagined. You are going to learn who you are. You're going to find out why you're here. And you're going to find out where you're going. And you better be ready for it. Because the impact of this, the worldwide implications of some of the knowledge that you're going to be seeing, learning, experiencing in the next few years, there are friends of mine who say it's going to begin in the next few months. And I say that it's already begun. You've seen things already in the last few years. Who would have believed 5 years ago that the Soviet Union would fall apart like it did? Who would have believed all of the things that have been going on in the last few years? Who would have believed that George Bush would lose the election after the Gulf War? You know, at one time he was, what, 80% in a favorable zone or something like that? And then old George lost it by a landslide. I mean, we're experiencing things even right now that are mind-boggling. And you look in the morning paper and you think, my God, what's next? Well, I'll share with you a few of the things that I've concluded are happening. Now, I'll have to jump back a little bit and talk to you about the fact that who were these people? Who are they? What in the world is happening that an advanced intelligence, an advanced spiritual, civilized society out there somewhere has an intimate involvement or interest in us? Why? Well, they created us. They caused us to be. I had a nagging suspicion that this kind of seeding has gone on all over the galaxy. But who are these people, and what are they doing here? And what is really happening here? Well, let's look at some of the facts. I got so much material here, I have to apologize with you that I could go on for about 4 or 5 hours, and I've done that a time or two. I think I talked for 3.5 in Dallas. When I left the service in 1976, the United States government knew for a fact that there were 4 separate, highly developed, high-technology extraterrestrial civilizations intimately involved with us. 4. Now, that was in 1976. That was a modest evaluation, we have learned. We have learned over the years that there is probably 50 or more, and some estimates have carried it up to 100. And I've heard Wendell discuss, he said, my God, some of the facts and the stuff I've heard, we may be being visited by thousands of people out there. Different groups from different places. That the universe is literally teeming with intelligent life. And that we are not, at the moment, a part of it. Here we are on a little third-rate planet circling around a second-rate sun on the edge of our own galaxy. And you know how many years we've been thinking to ourselves that we are God's prime creation. We're it. There's nothing else. You know, just a few short years ago, we thought that the universe, the solar system, all of it circled around the planet Earth. They even burned a couple of good men. Bruno was put to the stake because he insisted that the Earth went around the sun. And I understand just recently that the Vatican has just now reprieved him, or what did they call it? They have exonerated him. They've looked at the trial and said, well, gee, we screwed that one up. Poor old Bruno was right, and we're sorry. Well, I'm sure Bruno appreciates that now. What, 400 years, is it? 300 at least. Galileo recanted just to save his life, but Galileo knew the truth.
He was recently rehabilitated by the church.
Was he really?
Yes.
Wonderful. I'm delighted. I'm sure Galileo appreciates that. Anyhow, I throw this out just as a little bit of humor here to show you how slowly it's been, how many years it's taken us to work our way out of some of these primitive views. And I have something to share with you here to show you that not all of us have reached that level yet. A shocking thing happened to me just recently. Anyhow, in 1976, we knew of 4. Friends of mine in Langley have told me that we know of at least a dozen, perhaps 20. The estimates that I learned in Europe from people who've been deeply involved and bona fide researchers say it's well over 100 that are here, that are coming and going. Now, some of them are not coming and going. Some of them are here and have been here and are staying here. In 1976, we knew, and this is one of the things that really upset the generals, we knew that one of those groups looked exactly like we do. I mean exactly. They could put on a coat and a tie, a dress, a suit, sit next to you in a restaurant, sit next to you in an airplane, and you would never know. You would never know. And if you don't think that bothered the professional military people who are primarily paranoid, because we're trained to be, and I tell you from my own experience, we were trained to be paranoid. It was the nature of our business, and I think Graham will agree with me here. I know Wendell will, that the military point of view is a paranoid point of view. The idea that there was an intelligent, high technology, high civilization from somewhere else here in our midst drove them up the wall. To consider that somebody could be walking up and down the corridors of SHAPE headquarters who was not literally human, or could be walking up and down the corridors of the Pentagon, or, God forbid, in the White House, or 10 Downing Street. Oh my God, this nightmare went on and on and on. They looked exactly like we do. And some of the government contacts that have taken place where we have spoken with them has purposely proven that. I mean, beyond a doubt. Some of them can put on a military uniform, and you'll never know. That drove the generals crazy. It affected a 4-star Air Force general that I knew in 1964 so badly that he ended up putting in for retirement not too long after that. The air deputy was named Robert Lee. He worked for General Lemnitzer. He was the U.S. Air Force Air Deputy in 1964. He'd been an old friend of Curtis LeMay's. They chewed cigars. They went to school together. LeMay, as you remember, was the commanding general of the Strategic Air Command. Well, Bob Lee was a fine soldier, a fine military airman, highly decorated, highly respected. And when he read this assessment, his aide told me that the old man sat down, threw his hat across the room and said, "Good God, do you know what this means? Just think for a moment. Everything we've got, our missiles, our satellites, our rockets, our planes, the hydrogen bomb, everything we have that we point with pride means nothing." And it was a shock to the old man. It really affected him badly. He wasn't ready for it. And he literally did put in for retirement not long after that. The psychological effect on him was horrendous. But now consider for a moment that we've got intelligences We have high technology, advanced intelligences coming and going, some of them staying here, in our midst, being intimately involved with an interrelationship with us for not only hundreds but thousands of years. My God, can you consider the implications? How do you, as an elected government, go out on TV someday and tell the people that this is what we have concluded? Now, for many years, I was impatient as hell about my government's refusal to address the issue and share it with us. The reason I got angry about it is that you guys are the ones who are paying the bills. You're paying for the programs. You're paying for this enormous project over here at Groom Lake, just a few miles away. If you knew how much you were paying for that, you'd have a fit. If you knew what they were doing with your money. They're spending $50 billion of your tax money every year under black projects. Programs where they do not have to go to Congress to explain where that money is going. $50 billion a year. It jumped from 35 to 40 to 45, and now it's 50. My God, look at the national debt. How much longer are we going to be able to put up with that? Anyhow, forgive me for rambling a bit. I jump around from one subject to another here, but I hope to be able to maintain some kind of a point here and some kind of a purpose of what I'm trying to say to you. Question came up yesterday. A lady in the back asked about what's been happening over Los Angeles lately. With a rumbling sound, the seismometers have been going off. People are looking up. They're thinking they're in an earthquake. Well, that is a program that you've paid for called Aurora. It's a high-tech aircraft that's not very practical. It guzzles fuel like you wouldn't believe. It makes noise. My God, it makes so much noise it has to fly at 80,000 feet to keep from popping people's eardrums. Oh, it does indeed go 8,000 to 10,000 miles an hour. And yes, indeed, it can go into orbit and come back down again. But is it worth that kind of money? When we've got what they call at Groom Lake, unfunded opportunities flying over there that are circular, metallic, that don't make any noise, that raise up off the ground silently with a small humming sound and dart away at 5, 10, 15,000 miles an hour. Ladies and gentlemen, you not only have been taken to the cleaners, you've made a couple of round trips. Now, just a few short years ago, NASA, who is another big government agency that lies through its teeth to us, this lying has become almost institutionalized, and I tell you that from the inside. I was a part of it for a long time. I was trained to be a liar. I was trained to not divulge truths. And it's gotten so bad in Washington that there are some people in the Pentagon who I'm afraid don't even know how to tell the truth. There are easier ways, they say. And then one of them in CIA said recently, this is a quote, "If we've lied to you, it's for your own good." And that's like waving a red flag in front of me. I'm ready to take that person apart for that sort of thing. Anyhow, I'm talking about briefly what's going on over here at Groom Lake. We have extraterrestrial technology over there that we have received from two separate sources. Some of the hardware was retrieved as a result of several crashes that have taken place. I mean, we know about the crash at Roswell. Don't doubt for a moment that happened. That's all true. That took place. There was a crash at Kingman. There was a crash at Aztec. There have been crashes all over the United States. There were crashes right outside of LA. There was a crash in Washington State some years ago. A couple of crashes in Mexico that we retrieved the hardware. Not only did we retrieve the hardware, but we retrieved bodies. Some dead, some alive. Some of the alive bodies we kept alive for quite a while. Rumor has it that at least one of them is still alive. Well, that's one story. The other story is there are 25 or 30 of those little guys over there at Groom Lake at about 20 levels down at S4 that are working with us, that gave us hardware. And we are not only putting bits and pieces together, but we are flying the aircraft and we are flying prototypes. When NBC went over there here just a few months back, I don't remember the exact date, they were doing a little follow-up story on the Aurora because people were wondering what the hell was shaking LA every Thursday at 7 in the morning. And they sent a team over there. Well, they didn't get any pictures of the Aurora because the Aurora doesn't fly out of Groom Lake. It flies out of another base about 100 miles northwest of Groom Lake, beyond Tonopah. But what they did while they were over there is they got some incredible pictures. And the NBC reporter with this camera set up there says, my God, what we seem to be seeing here is something that apparently is violating all of the known laws of physics, like a UFO. And there that little Gomer is on the film, circular. With the blow-up showed it to be somewhat metallic. And there it is, coming up and hovering, darting around, going back down, darting off at a very high rate of speed, coming back, doing all kinds of things that traditional aircraft can't do. So over there, at your $50 billion skunk works, we have hardware that's flying. Apparently we do have a relationship with one alien group over there. Rumors that I have heard from reliable people that I trust indicate that we now have a relationship with at least 3 different groups. Not only the one that looks like us, but the big-nosed guys and the little grays. And this thing gets curiouser and curiouser, as Alice in Wonderland said. What is our government up to? What kind of involvement do they really have with alien intelligence? And why is it important that we pay attention and try to get a handle on what's going on here? Now, I'm going to tell you that I feel that within the next few months, there's going to be a major flap. I've shared this with Don and a few other people. I've been putting bits and pieces of information together from a variety of sources, and I think we're going to have a major UFO flap in this country, probably in the southwest. Very much like the Belgian flap, and very much like the Hudson Valley affair a few years ago, where we're going to be seeing large, triangular-shaped, boomerang-shaped, massive objects, 300 and 500 feet across, slowly flying across the skies of the American Southwest at low altitude, with no noise, and these objects are going to be enormous, and they're going to be flying in daylight, not at night, in daylight, and you're going to be seeing them. And then right after that, your government, the one you love and trust, is going to say, we have some information to share with you. And they're going to tell you a little bit about why they've lied to you for so much, for so long, and how they tried to protect you because they determined that you were not able or ready to deal with this information. Well, I disagree with that. I strongly and violently disagree with that. We're not sheep. They're treating us like that. But we're not. We're the sheep that are paying the damn bills. We have a right to know these things. And ladies and gentlemen, to use a military term, we have a need to know. Not only do we have a right to know because we're paying for much of it, but we have a need to know. Because the things that are going to be happening, that are going to change your life and change your world in a way that you will never imagine, are going to be happening soon. I say very soon. I hate to be a prophet. I hate to say it's going to happen like some of the fundamentalists, whatever they call it, the rapture or something. No, I can't, I won't get into that. I will, hopefully, not tread on some toes when I tell you that every major philosophy, every major religious philosophy from the beginning of our time has been given to us, has been seeded here, and has been manipulated by our higher advanced intelligence. And yes, good Christians, the carpenter from Nazareth is a part of the program. He was and he is. And I say that in that term, and many of you who are avid churchgoers, I think, know what I'm talking about. The rumors, the stories, the predictions, the prophecies that you're going to see him return the same way he left, I think are all going to take place. And I think that's going to shake up the world. It's going to shake up the Vatican. It's going to shake up every major religious organized church on this planet. I have to tell you about this bumper sticker that we've seen in Tucson that we all love. JC is returning, and boy is he pissed. And I like that. It appeals to my black sense of humor. But I think in a sense, in some form, in some way, that's telling the truth. And you know what's interesting to me is that I've discussed this with Hindus, Buddhists, Jews. I've discussed this with Jesuits of the Catholic Church who agree with me. Have you ever wondered why the church went back on its promise and never let you know about the prophecies from Fatima that they promised in 1960 to release to the whole world? Now, I don't know how many of you in the room may be good Catholics, and I'm not trying not to hurt your feelings, but if you are, your church let you down in 1960 because the Pope looked at him and says, oh, no way are we going to let this out. Why? Because the predictions from the little girls, from the beautiful lady at Fatima, were basically what I'm talking to you about right now. The events that are going to be taking place, the earth-shaking things that are going to be happening, that are going to change your life and change your view of the world and the universe more than you've ever grasped. Ladies and gentlemen, you are, and I say this with certainty, And those of you who've done your own homework know that I'm speaking the truth. You are immortal beings. What is sitting in those chairs out there are indeed containers, temporary suits of clothes. That you essentially are an immortal, intelligent life form, an energy life form that does not die. And this is going to be brought out and be made clearly as a fact. It's been the primary teaching of every major religion from the beginning of time. What amazes me is how most people don't even believe it. Most good church people don't grasp that they are indeed an immortal soul. Spirit, entity, call it whatever you like. You will live forever. And I'm convinced that you've been here before many, many times, and you'll probably come back again. But the things that are going to be happening to you in the next few short years, it's imperative that you be prepared for it. Because the rapture will happen, but it's not going to be like the fundamentalists think. It's not going to be like that at all. It's going to scare the hell out of them. Forgive me for rambling off a little bit on a personal view here. I think that we are going to be suffering and enduring some experiences here very shortly, and they've already begun. We're going to see cataclysmic occurrences here on the planet. The old mother planet here has just about had enough. You're going to see earthquakes, you're going to see volcanoes more and more and more. You're going to see tidal waves, you're going to see hurricanes that are going to literally obliterate large cities along the coasts. You're going to have cases where the cities will disappear beneath the sea. And as Casey said, you're going to have some more cases where cities are going to come up from the bottom of the sea that we haven't seen for 12,000 years. The world is going to suffer and endure some pretty horrible cataclysms very, very soon. But that's only part of the story. What's going to happen from out there when all of the visitors, at least a great number of them, are going to drop down some fine day and say, "Hi, we're here, and we've been here for a long time, but we think it's time now that you understand it." Every major serious researcher in this field has reached these same conclusions, and I'm pleased to find one of the most respected lady that I admire, by the name of Edith Fiore, sitting in the audience right here, who's written some of the most beautiful studies and books that's brought some of this information out. And I strongly recommend that you pay attention to anything that she might share with you during this conference. But we are dealing with the major issue of our time. Every major myth and legend that we have been taught over the years is more than likely true. The stories we've been told by organized structures and religions and governments and politicians are primarily myths and legends. You are more important than you realize. You are an everlasting, immortal life form with intelligence, with a curiosity, with not only the right to know, but a need to know some of the information that I've shared with you. Now, some of the things that are going to be happening to us very soon are going to be horrendous. Well, before I go on any further, I have one tiny piece of information to share with you. In 1979, Victor Marchetti, who was the former executive assistant to the deputy director of the CIA, said, "We have indeed been contacted." This is in '79. "By extraterrestrial beings, and the U.S. government, in collusion with other national powers of the earth, is determined to keep this information from the general public." Now, this is Victor Marchetti. "The purpose of the international conspiracy is to maintain a workable stability among the nations of the world, and for them in turn to retain institutional control over their respective populations." Do you see why they're scared to death? Thus, for these governments to admit that there are beings from outer space with mentalities and technological capabilities obviously far superior to ours could, once fully perceived by the average person, erode the foundations of the Earth's traditional power structure. Political and legal systems, religions, economic and social institutions could all soon become meaningless in the eyes of the public. The national oligarchical establishments, even civilization as we know it, could collapse into anarchy. Such extreme conclusions are not necessarily valid, but they probably accurately reflect the fears of the ruling classes of most major nations, whose leaders, particularly those in the intelligence business, have always advocated excessive government secrecy as being necessary to preserve national security. Now, a lot of you may know of Marchetti's statement. I like to quote it because I think it ties in perfectly with everything else we've been talking about. The reason they have kept the lid on it for so long was not just the Cold War. The reason they've kept the lid on it is because once they realized themselves the full implications of what was happening, not one group, not 4 groups, not even a dozen separate groups, but we got hundreds of advanced intelligences here, intimately involved with us, having an intimate interrelationship with the entire human population of this planet. How do your governments tell you that? How do they say, first of all, we've been lying to you for 40 years. Secondly, what's going to happen you can't deal with. I understand their problem, but I don't have that much sympathy for them, because they've created their own nightmare, and if they had shared some of this information with us openly and fairly, slowly and gently over the years, most of us would be more than ready to deal with it and take our places with them in dealing with this realization and this reality. I'm old-fashioned, people. I believe in my Constitution, and I believe that the American people are sovereign. That's what the hell this was all about 200 years ago. We are supposed to be sovereign. We run the government. We make the decisions. We select our leaders. They are answerable to us. Well, they've forgotten that. Most of the people in the intelligence business were never elected. No one decided to give them these jobs. Most of them were appointed. Most of them have been there for years and years and years. And Bob Gates is still trying to hold on, although I don't think he's going to make it at the CIA. I think January is going to see some changes there. But what I have said in bits and pieces and rambling over the last hour, covering an enormous amount of information, and I apologize to you for the fragmentary way that I've allowed you to have it and shared it with you. You have got to take the responsibility yourselves to inform yourselves, to become knowledgeable about what's happening, because when the events that I'm telling you about start to happen more and more and more, you better be ready for it. Some years ago, a good man, a dear man, who was the chairman of the Department of Atmospheric Physics at the University of Arizona, a gentleman by the name of Jim McDonald, who's no longer with us, one of the most brilliant researchers in UFO research that I've ever known. He said simply and bluntly, if you're not concerned and you're not interested in this subject, you're simply uninformed. Now, I commend you here today for coming, because you've obviously got an interest, you've shown some curiosity, and I suspect most of you are pretty well informed. But go out there and share with other people. Look at the skeptics you've run into. People who cannot for a moment grasp what we're talking about here. We're dealing with a new world that's going to be taking place very soon here, that's going to change our lives and our planet beyond anything we've ever dreamed. Now, I would like to conclude with 2 things. I would like to share my personal view with you and tell you that a door is indeed being opened for the human race. A time has come, which is the title of my book, forgive me for that. A time has come where we are reaching the end of a cycle. And the intelligent, civilized, advanced, thoughtful, caring, knowledgeable, compassionate human being is facing a future. A door is being opened for them to an infinite reality out there. And we have got to be prepared to go through that door. And we're not ready yet. NASA decided just a few short years ago, from estimates mind you, that there are 400 billion stars in our galaxy alone. Now, you know what our galaxy is like, that big spinning wheel. Looks like a lot the Andromeda galaxy. Beyond that, they said that they roughly have an estimate that there are 400 billion galaxies in the known universe. And I like to share with you that the only people I know who can deal with those kind of numbers are the guys that deal with our national debt, the budgetary people back in Washington. But beyond those 2 figures of 400 billion stars and 400 billion galaxies, they have said at the modest minimum, we estimate that there are probably 100 million planets with intelligent life out there. And now, think about it for a moment. When I have my slideshow, and there won't be time here today, maybe some other time while this conference is on, I have photographs that are literally stunning, mind-boggling photographs taken through the great telescopes of those galaxies and those stars. 100 million planets with intelligent life. How many of those are well beyond us? Can you imagine what a planet with intelligence that's 1,000, 100,000, 1,000,000 years ahead of us in science? We would think of them as gods, would we not? If they come here and show themselves and interrelate with us, our ancestors did. They called them gods. And those guys out there aren't really wanting that. They don't want us to look upon them as gods. They want us to look upon them as fellow citizens in a vast, vast community of life. Now we're going to have to be prepared to go through that door that's being opened for us. And what I'd like to point out to you is that we're going to go through that door together. One people from one planet with one future, or we're not going to go through that door at all. We are all the same. It doesn't depend what color we are. It doesn't make any difference what church we go to. It doesn't depend in any way on what language we speak. Every human being on this planet is an immortal life form, and we're going to have to reach that understanding. The garbage and the savagery in Yugoslavia of the ethnic cleansing has got to stop. The famines have got to stop. There's enough food on this planet to feed everybody. We have got to reorder our lives so that we can take our place and go through that door and become members of that infinite, vast community of intelligent life. Now that's my personal view. I would like to close by quoting a view from one of my great teachers, one of the people I admired the most as a great writer, Count Leo Tolstoy, some years back. He repeatedly made clear, this is one of his basic beliefs, that there is something in the human spirit that will survive and prevail. That there is a light that will not go out, no matter how dark the world becomes. I believe that to be so. I know that to be the case. I'm glad to share that statement from Leo Tolstoy with you and tell you that that is my view as well. And I have a nagging suspicion that it's the same view of everybody in this room. Again, I ask your forgiveness and for allowing me to be up here and to ramble a bit and jump around here and there, because there's so damn much material, it's hard to know just how to get it out. But in conclusion, I would like to say I want to thank you for the time. I want to thank you for being here and sharing a few moments with me. And I would like to throw it open for any comments or questions. Yes?
My question is that, well, in general, I'm frustrated by your speech. I think you're a great philosopher and a great prophet. But you told us that you worked between 64 and 76 for NATO under General Lyman Lemnitzer.
No.
You didn't?
I want to correct if I made a misstatement there. I worked at SHAPE headquarters from 1963 to 1967.
Okay.
And I left SHAPE. I helped move the headquarters from Roquencourt outside of Paris up to Brussels.
You worked in SHAPE? You worked in SHAPE in general.
Mm-hmm.
And you had access to this paper, The Assessment of the Possible Threat to Military Position in Europe and so on, which changed your life. Tell us more about what was in this document. Violate National Security Act some more. Give us the goodies. What specific things did you find out? You're telling us the conclusions. That's great. What things, though, led you to these conclusions? What did you learn? To spill the beans.
I know what you want, Eric. I know you want the whole nitty-gritty here, and I don't think there's really time to give it all out. I did not bring the... Let me make a point clear here. If I had copied the document, which I was tempted at one point to do, I'd have probably been now living at a place called Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, the Army Disciplinary Barracks, which is a top prison there. I did make notes, and I did rehearse, and I did study this thing. I couldn't put it down. It was filled with documents. It was filled with photographs. It was filled with incidents. Just to give you a few little incidents, there was a case involving a Danish farmer just outside the city of Aalborg in northern Denmark, where he and his wife were sitting down to dinner one evening. He heard a commotion in his pasture. He went to the door. I can just see him with the bib around his neck, with maybe a chicken bone in his hand, looking out the door, and he saw a silvery, disc-shaped object, about 35 feet in diameter, about 10 feet thick, sitting in his pasture. As he stood there, a door opened, a ramp came down, and two human beings came down the ramp, smiled at him and his wife, raised their hands, and invited him aboard in perfect Danish. The old man went aboard. The wife is still standing there with her mouth hanging open. The ramp goes up, the door closes, off the object goes. It was gone for an hour. In the meantime, the hysterical housewife calls the local police, who calls the local military, and an hour later, there must be 50 or 100 people all milling around the house and in the pasture, and the object comes back, lands in the pasture, the door opens, the ramp comes down, and the old man comes down just babbling with excitement about what he has seen, where he's been, what they told him. Well, needless to say, the military grabbed him, hauled him away, and debriefed him for about a week. One small incident. Another incident involving an airfield in northern Italy in 1963, the year I was assigned there. A young Italian Air Force sergeant guarding the runways at 3 in the morning, 2 days before Christmas. Colder than hell at that hour because this was just a few miles outside of Livorno, which is in northern Italy, at a NATO air base. An object comes down, lands on the runway, a door opens, a ramp comes down. 2 human beings, not little gray fellows, come down the ramp and in perfect Italian speak to the sergeant and invite him aboard. The kid was only 23. He said during the interrogation, during the debriefing, he said, "I was so scared I didn't know what to do." What was so sad is that he was so frightened, his bladder released, and he wet his pants. And he was so frightened he didn't go aboard, he didn't take an opportunity to go and take a trip with him. They smiled and waved and got back in the ship and left. Now, other incidents that have taken place are not quite so benign. A Turkish Air Force fighter with 2 crew members aboard in late 1963, before the document was published, were vectored toward a large metallic UFO a few miles outside of Izmir in Turkey. The Turks were and are members of the NATO alliance. They're members of SHAPE. The object was vectored toward an enormous metallic signal. They had both the jet and this big object on radar. The two came together. It was one blip, no jet. And then the enormous object flies away. They looked for 2 weeks. They had a whole regiment of the Turkish army out because this happened over land. And they looked for 2 weeks and found not one piece of wreckage, nothing. No plane, no pilots, nothing. The plane's gone. As far as I know, it never came back. That the document was stuffed with stuff like that. There was a crash in northern Germany, which Michael Hesseman has expressed a lot of interest in, where he's really trying to dig into it and see what can be learned. This happened in, I think, 62. I've got my notes that indicate when this happened. A large 30-meter metallic disc crashed in northern Germany right near the Baltic. And when they got on board, the British engineer battalion that salvaged it found 12 small gray bodies. I've seen photographs of some of the autopsies. I've seen pictures of the bodies on the stretchers when they were taking them out of the machine. The British engineer battalion figured out how to get that enormous object, 30 meters, is over 90 feet. They took it apart like pieces of a pie and hauled them away on lowboys. That was in the study. The study was stuffed with information like that. The annexes that supported the conclusions of the main document. It goes on and on and on. And, you know, as I said, they knew back then that there were 4 different groups, and one looked like us. They knew the little grays were around. They knew there was one group of grays that were larger, that had large noses, like the ones that apparently landed at Holloman Air Force Base. And Air Force friends of mine told me that that's no joke. That really did happen, and they do have it on film. You see, I could go on and on and on this, but it's not... I must be honest with you and tell you that I have learned things over the years and concluded things, and as a result of my synthesis, that make these specific little stories and facts somewhat meaningless. Eric, I no longer collect photos, I no longer collect landing reports, I no longer collect landing imprints, I no longer interview people who had sightings. I'm